Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club. And before I get into it, let me just say that if you're tuning in expecting to hear from Billy Beane, who leads diversity and inclusion efforts for Major League Baseball, there's been a bit of a change. He couldn't get out of New York because of severe weather, and we are rescheduling his appearance. But I have to say, I love our community. We are able to see every challenge as an opportunity. And so joining together with our community, we've put together a fantastic panel conversation about some of the issues we've been thinking about all week. The MLB All-Star Game was just one of many moments recently when the eyes of the nation were trained on Cleveland. We've had championship basketball, World Series baseball, probably one of the most remarkable mid-season turnarounds in recent NFL history. In 2021, we will host the NFL Draft. In 2022, the NBA All-Star Game. In 2024, the NCAA Women's Division I Final Four. So that gives us about, yes, right? I know. That's what you call momentum. And that gives us about 4.5 years to win a Super Bowl. So when you think about all of this, you might ask yourself, how do we make the most of these moments? And how do we make sure that these moments include as much of the community as we possibly can, as they possibly can? So in true Cleveland spirit, where we find the opportunity in whatever challenge we encounter, we are meeting Billy Beane's absence with a panel conversation about this amazing MLB All-Star Week and the power of sports to bring a community together and to bring out the best in that community. It sounds boostery, I know. But when it comes to leveraging an all-star game to meet community needs, it's actually not always that easy, and we'll unpack some of that today as well. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our moderator today. He's a great friend of the City Club, WKYC's Russ Mitchell. He's been in Cleveland since 2012 when he took over as lead anchor on WKYC. He's from St. Louis originally and may be best known nationally for his work in a variety of roles at CBS News. And Russ will introduce our panelists, members and friends of the City Club. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Russ Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you. Dan, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate you coming out today, and want to say thanks to the City Club, Stephanie Jansky, Dan, and her crew for doing an amazing job in putting this together today at the last minute. A round of applause for those folks, if we can. I came in and asked if they were at the bar, already, and they said after this they're going to make it over there. So I totally understand. Let's begin our program now. To my immediate left, Dennis Lehman, Executive Vice President of Business for the Cleveland Indians. To my far left, David Gilbert, President and CEO of the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission. And before we go any further, gentlemen, hey, congratulations on an amazing week. Just a wonderful week. Dennis and David will be signing copies of Billy Beane's book afterward. Too soon, Dan? It's okay. All right. David, let me begin with you. This is a high-hanging curve for you, if I can throw this at you. What kind of reaction are you getting from not only the city, but from around the country on how Cleveland handled itself this week?
It's been incredible and gratifying because what we're hearing from around the country, from a lot of people in our industry, and also what national writers are writing about is how amazing Cleveland performed. And a lot written certainly about baseball and tremendous things there. But really a lot of talk of our community setting the bar for how this event was held and managed. And huge team effort, but that's, you can't ask for anything better than that.
Great publicity everywhere. Dennis, what do you hear?
Well, I hear the same thing. I will tell you this, that what's not remarkable in some respects is that people talk about the kindness of the people who are on the street and people who interacted with our visitors. And the fact that people are very outgoing, they looked you in the eye, they wanted to help you in some way if you looked like you were lost. To me, that was sort of like, it's an affirmation of the fact that we really live in a wonderful community and that people really sort of look out for each other. And I thought that was very, very interesting for other people to sort of pick that stuff up. And I think the other thing too, and we've heard a lot of this just recently with some of the national media, is how clean the downtown was and how the infrastructure seemed to perform so nicely. And you can kind of talk about these sort of abstract sort of things, and we kind of look at it every day, but when you see other people sort of noticing everyone sort of coming together and working together, it's really it's a wonderful thing to hear from other people. That affirmation is really important.
Let me ask you this, Dennis, before an event like this, and you've got all this anticipation, you've done all this work in putting things together, what are the biggest concerns? What are the biggest issues that you think about, wow, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong?
Well, you don't know what you don't know, I guess, in some respects. So I think we sort of felt comfortable that we could execute from that standpoint. I think that what was challenging was that baseball was doing some things they had never done before. So, for example, the Play Ball Park, which sat on top of the convention center, there were weight restrictions, and there was all new equipment that had just been built just for Cleveland that needed to be properly positioned and so forth. And then probably the most complicated thing that we certainly faced was really the red carpet show, which happened on Tuesday. Again, but that was that collaboration thing. So in a lot of respects, I think we were anxious about it, but we got started pretty far out in some respects. So we've been talking about this for 10 months or so. So there were no surprises, I guess is the best way to describe it, and that everybody had their cards on the table. It was just when it really came together and the massive of it was like, whoa, it was the trucks that were. We spent a lot of time with our city friends about weight restrictions, and the size of these trucks that were out on Play Ball Park were really just they were staggering in the sizes. I mean, you can see them on paper, but you certainly can't expect them.
David, as confident as I know you were going into this week, are there sleepless nights on those nights before the event? How would you describe your stomach before everything turned out the way it did?
Always sleepless nights. It's more you just hope everything goes well. You spend years preparing for something like this, and you want it to go right. It's you're inviting tens of thousands of people to your house, and you want everything to go exactly right. And a lot of things you can't control. So much of this you can't control, and so I think a little bit of pins and needles all along the way, and the best you could do is have as much preparation as you can, so that if and when things start to go sideways, you could stop it before small things become major problems.
Let's go back to the process now, and this really is for both of you. And you said, of course, the city, the team, the Sports Commission have been planning for this for years. Let's go back to the very beginning. How do you get an event like this? How does it start?
Well, it starts by asking baseball to provide you with a document where you essentially fill out a form, and then you open up a file, and then you have this kind of a give and take as far as what are the expectations of a major event like this, because of the need for controlling their expenses, controlling our expenses, making sure they understand what you have as far as not only the ballpark itself, but the convention center, the hotel spaces, and so forth. And all that sort of gets loaded into a document that then David and his group then sort of craft it and put it together so that we present it to Major League Baseball as a document that says this is what we can do. And that's how it begins, and then it's scrutinized by Major League Baseball. So in a lot of ways, all of these different All-Star games and the NFL Draft and the NBA All-Star Game, there's a lot of competition among cities that are looking to attract these sort of major events. And so you've got to be on your toes, because you're actually playing against, in our case, it was the Dodgers and the Atlanta cities that likewise wanted to have the 19 event as well. So we were lucky enough that we got the 19, and then Los Angeles has it next year and Atlanta the following year. But that's the kind of activity that goes on, and then we got kind of the green light, probably super secret 4 years ago.
In terms of that competitiveness, David, how would you describe it in terms of competing with other cities to get an event like this?
I mean, they're all very competitive. When we were going after the NFL draft, the first bid, which we didn't win, it was for 2019-20. There were 22 cities, all bidding on just 2 years. We were after a number of rounds. We made it down to a final 5. And Nashville and Las Vegas were chosen, and then went back into the competition. We were fortunate enough to get it for 21, but they, none of these happened by accident. They're all some very hyper competitive, and we want to win. And I would tell you, we go in expecting to win. And I think what this past week showed is we believe wholeheartedly that if we don't get chosen, whoever's event it was, NCAA or Olympic governing bodies or any of the others, they made the wrong choice. I mean, we go into this thinking that we know that our job is to set the bar to make the event better than anywhere else it's been, and if we're confident about that going in, we think we have a better chance.
Is there? I envision this at some point being a room that somebody walks in and makes a formal presentation. Am I right about that? Mm-hmm. What's the strongest pitch for Cleveland that you heard, that you made during this process?
I think in most of them, it is we will make your event better, and we will wrap our community around your event unlike anybody else. And and Dennis talked about all the check the box. If you have to show you've got the hotels and the convention center and all the facilities, that's I think that's sort of the table stakes. And after that, for all of these organizations, it doesn't matter at every level. We're hosting the World Yo-Yo Championship in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. That event is, for that group, it is just as critical as the All-Star Game is for MLB.
Yeah, sure.
So you have to go into that being able to convince them that that's their lifeblood. That's their baby, and you have to go in. Our job is to go in to demonstrate and show them how we are going to take care of them unlike anybody else. And so the successes of events that we've had play a big role in our ability then to say this is what we did with whether it's RNC, MLB All-Star, many others, and it's a pretty small universe. A lot of these folks know each other, and I think that really helps when we've built the resume we've had of not just hosting but successfully hosting these events. I think it really helps build on the next one.
When does the city become involved? The city and the county. At what point do they become involved in these discussions?
I think that they become involved right away because of the infrastructure needs. So as far as the scope of activity, the city and county need to be involved right away. So in a lot of respects, these packages that David talked about are sort of built in conjunction with those two entities. And because we're using city and county properties in some respects. So you've got to make sure that you got clearance for it. You got to make sure that the booking is covered, and of course the county and the city build so many things here. So in a lot of ways they're very comfortable knowing that you're sort of driving business towards them, and they're able to use these infrastructure that they've created in order to support what they said they were doing. And I think that's made it really helpful. So I mean, in a lot of ways, having a new convention center attracted a lot of these events. Having a giant convention hotel helped secure these activities, because if you didn't have them, they wouldn't really be coming back, because they'd have to scale it down to a degree. Because we had the All-Star Game in 1997, and we were in the old convention center, and there was a lot of heartache there, because the old convention center didn't have spanning floor space where you had a structure that you could lay out a room that didn't have a lot of poles. And this convention center doesn't. It has the expansion of not having support beams that sort of block everything, and that was a big deal. And of course, we got the new Hilton Hotel, which became the player hotel for player activity, so they could move in and out of that convention area very quickly because it was all underground. It was connected in some way. So a lot of this was, making sure that the city and county were involved early was really very helpful.
There's a story out there, and you've both heard it, and since I've got you both here, I'm going to ask you about it. That story is that Major League Baseball, at some point, came in and asked the Indians, look, we'll give you the All-Star Game, but one stipulation, you have to diminish Chief Wahoo's presence. Yeah. Is that true at all?
No, that's not true. I think that Rob Manfred at the World Series in 2016 got into that discussion with the media and with us as well. But it was not a quid pro quo kind of thing. No, it was his point of view was that we think that we'd like to have the logo go away, but it wasn't. We didn't have to change the logo to get the All-Star Game. That was not the case at all.
Let me go back to David to something you spoke about earlier, the RNC, and having covered the RNC here, of course, and then gone on to Philadelphia. Right after that, the next week, there were so many people who had covered both conventions and just talked about what a wonderful job Cleveland did and how much more they enjoyed Cleveland than Philadelphia because of just the way the city treated them and various things. You talked about how that is a big factor when you go in and you speak to people and you talk about the RNC. Was that really the catalyst for a lot of this stuff? When you walk in, is that something you can point to recently and say, this is what we did?
Absolutely, particularly with the NFL draft. As large as that event has become, it was estimated about 200,000 people a day attended in Nashville, and we were there. If it wasn't 200,000, it was awfully close. And the RNC is a political convention is about as big as it gets in terms of overall coordination. And not only did Cleveland host it to show that we could check the box on all the things they needed, but because it went so well. And that's a testament to this community knowing how to work together when these things happen. And it's also a testament to how personally we take these things and doing all the small things, all the small things that were also done during MLB All-Star Game that other communities, I don't think they do, or not to the scale that we do. And it makes an absolute enormous difference. And our ability to be able to talk to anybody, particularly the largest events rights holders, about what this community did with hosting the Republican convention, it's a tremendous calling card for us.
Dennis, in the MLB community, how big are the bragging rights in something like this? Not only the fact that we got this, but the fact that the city did a wonderful job.
Oh, well, we're not that braggadocious. I'll say that. I think they saw it. I don't think we need to do much more than that. I think that it's interesting you said that. But in 2016, Major League Baseball came here to see. They were here a little bit for the convention. They were here for the debate, and then they were here, obviously, for the World Series. So they know the team that we have internally that they're pretty comfortable with. So they know that they can bring in the television trucks, and they know how everything sort of gets handled, and we take a lot of pride in that and how it all works. So they know what they're getting when they come in here, because they're a couple of guys with gray hair like me that have been around a little bit. So they they see us and they're like, oh, okay, we're all right. But I think that the challenge that baseball has going forward with a city like this that really embraces something, and baseball then owns the city, if you will. They own the airport, and they allow the banners and so forth, is that they go to Los Angeles next year, and they know they have some challenges there, not only just because of traffic, but just because of what they want to do. They can't do it in Los Angeles. They can't do a red carpet like they did it here. They'd have to do it much like what they do in Hollywood grand openings or the Oscars or what have you. But the play ball park and trying to get kids' involvement with the play ball area is difficult, because they don't have a convention center that sort of sits like it does in downtown here. We have full use of green space, and that ability to have all that activity in a walkable town is bragging rights, I guess you'd say, because it is a separator from other communities, and I think that holds well for the draft as well as the NBA All-Star Game, because it's easy to get around. It's not difficult to get back and forth from your hotel or from the airport, and it's a convenient sort of town, if you will, to enable all these big events.
I'm going to allow you to be braggadocious here for just a minute, if you don't mind. I understand Cleveland has had 6 All-Star games, and that is more than any other city with one team. What does that say about the Cleveland Indians?
We got an early start. We hit it early in the 30s and 40s, but I think that we had it in '81 at Cleveland Stadium, and that was right after the baseball strike, which was sort of a healing sort of All-Star game, if you will. And it had a big house because Cleveland Stadium had 71,000 fans or whatever it was at the time. And then in '97, of course, we were here with almost a brand new facility. So I think it says that, again, it's one of these things where baseball comes in and knows that Cleveland will do a good job, and it also is it's a good community to work in, because they know that the local base will support something like this. So I think they feel good about that.
Starting early is good.
Starting early is good, yeah.
David, looking forward to the NBA All-Star Game, the NFL Draft, and the Women's Final Four. What did you learn? What did the city learn? What did your group learn from this experience that maybe you'll do differently next time?
Yeah, actually, we had about a half a dozen staff in from the NFL looking at how the Rock Hall was used, and the convention center and the malls and inside and outside of Progressive Field. So I think we always look at things that went right, things we could do better. One of the things I will say I think that's very unique about Cleveland, and we feel so good about, is we've learned a long time ago that you can use the hosting of these major events as a platform for community change, a platform for gathering the community. And so one of the things we did around the hosting, knowing now that we have these 4, in many ways you could argue the 4 most high-profile events Cleveland can bid on to host. We hope we're in another World Series soon or NBA championship that you can't bid on, but the 4 that we could bid on, all within a 5-year period of time. How do we coalesce the community we have this incredible platform. And so how do we, and we've done this with, I think the community did an amazing job with this around things like the International Children's Games and the Gay Games and the Senior Games. How do you use events that have a real natural affinity to them to elevate an issue? And we're doing the same thing around the hosting of these events to use them as a way to engage thousands or tens of thousands of people in the community who may not even have a ticket to the event, but can feel like they're a part of it. And to me, those are great lessons, because it's beyond just the logistics of hosting a great event. It's how do you continue to be creative? I mean, this lunch is well, not this one, but the one that was going to be here. Through our friends at KeyBank, we're going to do 5 straight years a City Club Forum focused on barrier breaking in sports. I mean, you've got this amazing platform of these sports leagues and the NCAA. And I'll let Dennis speak to what Major League Baseball and the Indians did with other community partners in raising millions of dollars to leave legacy around the community for kids. We brought down thousands of kids from around Northeast Ohio, busing them in, giving them T-shirts, giving them lunch, so they don't feel like this is somebody else's event in their community, that they're proud that the world is watching us. And I think that's where we try to look for a lot of lessons, how to continue to up our game in doing that.
Dennis, we talked about that a little bit at the table, what the Indians are doing, what Major League Baseball is doing in the field of diversity and inclusion.
Well, baseball's got a very robust department in diversity inclusion, and they require and benchmark teams in participating with contractors and various groups who buy product in particular areas of the country, especially at the team level. And they call it the Diversity Gateway, where we bid on contracts for various things within our own organization. And we use baseball's platform in order to reach out into not only this community, but any community in the country, especially when we need products that are not necessarily developed here in Cleveland. So we do have that piece of that. And they've done a nice job of holding each team's feet to the fire, and by also showing the teams where they can improve in some ways. And they've been doing that for quite some time. In addition to that, of course, when they come in for these events, especially the All-Star Game, likewise they benchmark how much money they spend in each community, as they did with this one as well. So there were various challenges that were not necessarily thrown at us, but also baseball themselves. They came in, looked for some direction, used the gateway in order to go into the marketplace and make sure that they secured those sort of things. The other thing that baseball does is they feel that because they come into communities like this, it's not just taking, if you will. So they started actually in 1997 when we first had the All-Star Game here, in having legacy projects that would then leave infrastructure at the community level that would stay in the community over the course of time. We did our first project in 1997 called the Larry Doby Playground at King Kennedy, and it was next door to the Boys and Girls Club, which we've had a long-term relationship not only locally but also with Major League Baseball. So we went back there and redid the playground as our first legacy project. But we did some really, I think, tremendous things that really sort of floated my boat. We rebuilt two fields, one at Luke Easter Park in the Mount Pleasant section, and we did one at Brookside over next to the zoo. So we built these gigantic baseball fields that have turf now, and we redid the whole space, so it enables kids to play baseball in the weather that we're in, especially in the spring, because a lot of times we support rec center baseball, we support CMSD baseball as well, because they need the funding. So we fund all those programs, but you can't play the game a lot of times in March and April because they can't get on the fields, they can't have practice. They take a 12-game or 15-game schedule and they wind up playing only 8 games. Now with turf fields, they can play a lot more, and I think that's really going to be a difference maker in a lot of ways.
That is fantastic. We're going to go to audience questions in just a minute, but before we do that, Dennis, let me ask you this. When we get the next All-Star Game in, I guess, 2026 or something like that, let me go back to the question I posed to David. What are the 1 or 2 things that the team learned that perhaps it will do differently next time, or is there nothing you do differently next time?
I think that the only thing I would probably do is do more legacy projects, because I think what we found was that it sort of moves the needle, because we got to talk to the foundations, we got to talk to city planners, we looked at recreation usage and things like that, and I think if we can continue to collaborate with city, county, metro parks, and foundations, we can start to build green space in a lot of these areas that probably need the lift. And then that supports the neighborhood in some ways. So not only we support the kids, but we also have an opportunity to then work with developers and people like that, like the Mount Pleasant area that was important for us to be involved in, so that you can sort of piggyback on some of these areas there. And I think that's the thing that we probably want to do a little more as well.
I'm Russ Mitchell, anchor and managing editor of WKYC TV, and today we're listening to a forum on maximizing community benefits of hosting major sporting events. Our guests today are David Gilbert, President and CEO of the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission, and Dennis Lehman, Executive Vice President of Business for the Cleveland Indians. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students. If you would like to tweet a question, please tweet it to @TheCityClub, and our staff will try to work it into the program. Holding the microphone today are our content coordinator, Bliss Davis. Bliss, where are you? Hi, Bliss. And City Club intern, Sophia Brewer-Thompson. Sophia, where are you? How are you? I'm just fine. Excellent. May we have the first question, please? Anyone have a question? Here we go, right over here.
You said a lot, the whole world is watching. Well, tell me, did people come in to watch the games from other countries, and which countries were the most prominent?
The most prominent countries were Japan and Korea as far as broadcasting was concerned. And I would say that's probably the most heavily broadcasted area as far as that's concerned. I don't have all the demographics because I haven't seen them yet. But I would tell you that we had quite a bit of Dominican and Puerto Rican fans that came to the ballpark. It was a pretty good group of folks that came there. But primarily, Baseball International has done a very good job in Korea and Japan, and they had their broadcast networks here also taking a lot of those feeds.
Any other questions here? Yes.
You guys did a tremendous job, both the team and the commission. It seems that in the sports world, you can be very successful in getting the name of Cleveland out there and putting on wonderful presentations that have raised the visibility of Cleveland nationwide at least. Recently, Cleveland attempted to make application to Amazon for a business venture here, which wasn't apparently very well received. What takeaways do you have, if any, for the business community, for the political community, to translate some of the successes you have had at the Sports Commission so that perhaps we can do a better job of attracting jobs, and jobs, to quote the late governor?
Excellent question.
It is a great question. And I would tell you, I think that this community needs to be there needs to be more trust and cooperation amongst the public, private, and civic sectors. We need to do a better job of taking advantage of these opportunities. One of the things we know, I wear one other hat, which is running Destination Cleveland, more the travel and tourism organization. And from all the research we've done, one of the things we know is the perception of Cleveland from those who've never visited to those who have there's a huge gulf, and is probably as wide as any city in the country. And part of that is, there may be a low bar going in, but that's fine. We know advertising, even seeing games on TV, change people's image, but being here is what truly does it. So you have an event like this that brings 40, 50,000 people to town. We need to do a far better job of tracking those people, of trying to use those as these big opportunities as an opportunity to bring the right people to town. And we talk about with visitors, millions of new visitors a year. Those are first dates. I mean, that's how we view it with Cleveland. All this opportunity, we have 40, 50,000 first dates to Cleveland. The key is, how do we translate those into longer term relationships? And I think that needs to be a far better coordinated job between all of those sectors. I wish I could say I knew exactly how to do it, but we know that the good news is, as Dan mentioned, we have these other major opportunities in front of us, and we can't blow them.
Wearing your Destination Cleveland hat for a second, I think of Pittsburgh in the 70s, which suddenly became the city of champions. How much does that perception, the perception of sports teams, the perception of doing a great job on events like this, have to do with the way others perceive your city?
It's tremendous. There's a lot written about sports stadiums and publicly sub, which is how sports stadiums are around the country. But I think what you said, Russ, there is no other platform we have that where regularly on national media our city is warned. You may be a sports fan or not a sports fan, but I think it's hard to deny that a calling card for a city can be particularly its professional sports. And so if we did not have the Cavaliers, the Indians, the Browns, we wouldn't have MLB All-Star Game, we wouldn't have NFL Draft, we wouldn't have NBA All-Star Game. Those events collectively will bring hundreds of thousands of people to town, and it is significantly important. It by no means is it the driver, but it does offer a community a huge opportunity, and opportunities that, again, I believe we need to take better advantage of. But thankfully, we do have those teams, and they do provide us a real platform.
I've always thought of it as when we have events like this, it provides the country a cinematic view of Cleveland as opposed to a snapshot.
Yes.
And it really does, I think, make a big difference. Any more questions here?
We have a question from Twitter.
Okay.
Hearing this conversation sort of reminds me of the Cleveland International Film Festival, which has a reputation of treating filmmakers like movie stars. How did the players experience Cleveland? Were we as welcoming as we hoped we were?
The players really enjoyed their stay here because, as I mentioned to you, they stayed at the Hilton, and they came here with their mothers and their fathers and their kids and their wives. So it's a reunion for them in a lot of ways, and an honor for them, obviously, too, because I think their moms and dads must be, glowing with pride. But staying at the Hilton, they looked down below. They saw Playboy Park on a daily basis. They saw the zip lines and they saw the concerts that were going on and so forth. And I think they felt pretty good about the fact they could just walk downstairs, walk outside, and participate. And that's much different than a lot of towns. So I think in a lot of ways they were very pleased with that, how that situation occurred. And then I haven't talked to many of the players, but I know that based on how they got dressed up for the red carpet, it seemed to me that they were having a good time there too.
Well, and I would add, those are big influencers. Think of the social media that those folks have, whether you're a sports fan or not. It's really important that when you have influencers in town, it's amazing. We've had a lot of people sending us quotes from different people about what they're saying about Cleveland. And it's amazing how many players were quoted about what an amazing city Cleveland was, beyond just their baseball experience.
We had, Michael Brantley came back and was honored because he was on the All-Star Game, and he had already come back earlier in the season, but he had this thunderous ovation when he was introduced, and he mentioned that he had, his whole body was glowing, and he was so prideful of fact, and he kind of wept a little bit because of the fans and how they reacted to him, and he was really thrilled with that.
Any questions on this side or that side? Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
I have a question really about the next couple of years, David. So happy about the legacy projects and the leave behind, and hopeful that maybe the NFL and the NBA and the Women's Final Four will do similar projects. But what about bringing people not only for business to Cleveland, but are we leveraging the opportunity to talk about the affordability of housing in Cleveland, the cost of living in Cleveland, why people should come here to live, and of course say yes to education and what all that's going to mean for the students who are in CMSD? So
it's another great question. Again, it's a little bit more on the Destination Cleveland hat, but we've been asked to really get involved in the whole notion of talent attraction, with the idea of travel and tourism is growing significantly, more people coming, and again, seeing those as people who see Cleveland differently. How do we translate that? And so we just finished a first round of some national research on how people perceive Cleveland as a place to live. We do a lot of it as a place to visit. I don't think anybody's ever done that. And so we really are at the front end of some strategies, Karen, to do exactly what you said. We need to, one thing that's important to note is, for all of us in here that are Clevelanders, presumably we live here, we know what a great place it is. We're not our customer, right? With the people in this room, Clevelanders are not the people that we're marketing to. It's people from the outside. And there still is a real perception issue. It's something we've battled for 50 years. And events like the All-Star Game and others absolutely help, but we need to be much more strategic on who we talk to, people that are open to the message of Cleveland, and then to your point, really telling that story of the affordability, of the education, because we know what it is, and I believe it's one of the most important things over the next several years that our community can do.
Any more questions on this side? Hi.
Such a pleasure to hear you all present today. If Mr. Bean had been here, I believe his topic was going to touch on diversity issues. And so I ask a very open-ended question. How did the whole question of inclusion and diversity show up, perhaps on your planning radar, but maybe even as a surprise as you encountered this event? And please share with us whatever insight you may have.
I appreciate it. It's something we're actually very proud of, and it goes back to one in working on a number of events leading up over the last 8 or 10 years, a number that I mentioned that we've tried to use as a platform for major issues. But as we were working with the Indians and the Cavs and the Browns, there was an interesting fact that kept popping up as Cleveland being an amazing city of first as it comes to diversity and inclusion in sports. I mean, you can go to Larry Doby, the first African-American player in the American League, Frank Robinson, the first African-American manager, Wayne Embry, the first African-American general manager with the Cavaliers. You can go back to Jesse Owens. You could talk about Charlie Sifford down in Canton in the PGA Tour, and his daughter Renee Powell, and there's a number of others. And we really thought this community should be proud of its history. And this is, and so we thought one of the platforms we should be utilizing over the course of these years is diversity and inclusion. And knowing that we have the platform of these major events, it means something. And again, that's why in working with Key, the idea of every year for 5 years, we're going to hold this forum and bring somebody in who was a barrier breaker in diversity and inclusion in the area of sports to highlight the issue. And but you know, there is a lot to be proud of in Cleveland's history in barrier breaking in sports. And that was really that light bulb of how much of that is in Cleveland's history was the first part of it.
Let's talk about when I first got here 8 years ago. There was talk, and that's all it was, of putting a dome on top of First Energy Stadium. Of course, that has not happened. But I ask both of you, how much of a game changer would that be if we had a stadium with a dome on it in terms of bringing events here?
What date is Dee Haslam speaking?
I see. Okay. All right.
A dome, if he could remove it, would be a game changer for baseball. Absolutely. I think that we look at some of our teams around the country that have retractable domes, and they do very well in April and May. It's always been a bit of a challenge for us in April and May to attract a consistent group sale, if you will, because that's really where places like Milwaukee do so very well in climate that's difficult. So I think that would be helpful. I think the other thing that I remember, way back when, is that if you have a dome stadium, you can attach something next to it and use the dome itself as part of a convention package in a lot of ways. So you can do those sort of things, and certainly it attracts a Super Bowl because you need a dome for a Super Bowl or a men's Final Four.
Yeah, David, for you, getting a dome in a stadium, would that be like you're getting a new bicycle at Christmas time?
It certainly opens up. Essentially, with the new convention center, when that opened, all of a sudden there was a universe of events. Even things like major volleyball tournaments, the ceilings were too low at the old convention center. We couldn't even consider it. So it certainly opens up, Dennis mentioned the men's Final Four, Super Bowl, and others. Obviously, there's a lot of cost benefits to weigh, but it absolutely would open up other possibilities for us.
Despite all the great things the city and the Indians have going on, the Indians still consistently rank in the bottom third in Major League Baseball attendance. Why is that?
The heck if I know. I think we have a great fan base, and I think we've had a lot of success over the last few years, and I think that we've been supported very well. We count. You can count attendance a number of different ways. You can count head count, or you can count gross, and we're doing just fine. So I think in a lot of ways, in our peer group, which we have 5 other teams we sort of look at, we're performing very well. And now I think that we'd love to have more people come to the ballpark. I think that that would be fine, but I also think we know what we have, and we've been able to develop that fan base, and we live on the repeat customer. And it's nice to have out-of-towners that come, but it's really the folks sitting in this room that are really our fan base and how important they are. And I hope you understand how well I think we try to treat you as a good customer, and when you come to visit us. So I think that I think we're doing fine. We'd always like to have a couple more, but I think that we're not really obsessed by the fact that we're maybe 24th of 30. That's okay.
Yeah, one thing I'd want to add to that is, we have three, probably we have teams in the three largest and most prominent leagues based on historical size of our market compared to others. And we're the smallest market in the country to have MLB, NFL, and NBA. And so it's, I think all of our teams need to punch above their weight. It's simply based on the size of the market, the number of people in our market per major team. So it's, not to defend Dennis because he doesn't need it, but there's a lot of factors. Not about the Indians and how well they do. In fact, if you look at the success of the team, it's incredible for a smaller market team. How many, best record in the American League, a lot of great statistics. But it's a little bit of a challenge for Cleveland overall.
Does weather play a factor as well? We touched on that earlier.
Yeah, I think weather does. I think it was a factor this year. One of the things that happens with weather too is that you can't make it up. In a lot of ways, you lose that unsold seat. Or it's too cold to really buy yourself a hamburger or a hot dog because it's just not attractive to do that kind of thing. So, in a lot of ways, this particular spring was particularly challenging. But we've been through that before. It all evens out at the end anyway. So, but we're doing fine in that regard.
Sophia? Hi.
My question is kind of related to the last one. I really love baseball, but I get really concerned about its future because I find these games too darn long and they end too darn late. And I know that's an issue during the week with the Indians because even with the 7 o'clock starting time or 6:30 starting time, I mean, it's just very late to get home and all that. And of course, there's been a lot written, and I don't know if you're privy, if you can tell us this, but is there any concern in the Indians organization about the length of the games, and do they support any of these ideas floating around to shorten the games?
I think that the national media certainly has a lot to say about the length of the games. If you really sort of poll our fan base, they don't seem to quite share the same concerns. I will say that the commissioner is very actively involved in trying to tighten the game. They're going to implement some rules next year about how many batters a relief pitcher faces next season. The time clock is getting closer and closer to reality as far as your ability to get back in the box and make sure that the pitcher throws the ball at a certain amount of time. So all these things are starting to come together as far as compressing some of that dead time, if you will. So I think there's a move afoot to do those sort of things. I think there'll be small little changes. We might save 10, 15 minutes at that time, but I think a lot of it has a lot to do with the performance of what's going on the field too, as far as the trend today is that nobody likes to take a walk or either strike out or hit a home run, which is kind of new in a lot of ways. So all those sort of changes are sort of morphing and have a direct effect on the length and time of the game, but I think for the most part we are trying to make some changes in that. But any kind of change like this, a lot of it has to be collectively bargained. So it's not necessarily something that the commissioner can unilaterally change. They have to bring the union to the table. They have to have a conversation. They have to talk to the players. They have to talk to the umpires to make sure that it's properly implemented. And they're doing some things right now in the minor leagues as far as that's concerned too. So they're testing a lot of this. So they're building a database of information that they'll be able to apply in conversation with the unions going forward. So it's coming along. It's just going to be slow.
Every once in a while we'll have a story about a team, a high school team or a league that cannot field enough players because kids are not playing baseball like they used to, certainly not like they did when we were kids. How do you convince that younger generation just how great a game baseball is?
Well, that's a big focus on baseball right now, and I think that's the one thing that we're trying to, why we build fields and why we're trying to train coaches, which we've done the last couple of years here in Cleveland. And I think that we want to show kids that it's fun to play baseball. We have various programs right now where you can play as a young person. It's not necessarily the game. It's out there just having fun, and getting kids to understand that they can throw, they can play catch, they can do other games as well as we were kids. So whether it's run the bases or or some sort of tag game, just to get the kids actively involved, to see what a ball and bat and glove can do besides playing the game itself. So in a lot of ways we do quite a bit of that in this area we call Rally Cap, which is a program for younger kids. But baseball is moving much more towards having more kids play and activate that play, if you will, not just the game, that I think is going to be very helpful for us going forward. And baseball too, it's a relatively safe game in a lot of ways. So we have a lot of equipment that's used. There's not a lot of physical contact that goes on, and I think that's the kind of thing that I think is going to be helpful for baseball going forward. There's a lot of competition, no doubt about it. I think, and from my perspective, I can certainly see it not only with soccer, but with lacrosse. And a lot of kids today are playing all these games that, when I was growing up, we just played baseball. So a lot of the kids today have to be introduced to some of these games in a different manner in order for them to feel more engaged in some of this activity. So I think that's kind of the focus.
Hi.
So hey guys, thanks again for jumping in at the last minute. We've heard a lot of conversation about kind of what an economic driver our three professional sports teams truly are, and it's similar in the role that it plays in our economy to the arts and other sorts of entertainment. Right now, there's this larger regional conversation going on about economic development. And I wonder if the two of you could talk a little bit about the role you see for the professional sports teams in that broader conversation about economic development, talent development, workforce development, and all of that, because the city wouldn't be the same without our professional sports teams in terms of its economy. So we ought to make sure, I guess, that the sports teams are integrated into that, into the future.
There's two thoughts come to mind. I think it's a great question. One, I'm a believer in we're all Cleveland. The outside world doesn't know the suburbs. I don't live in the city of Cleveland, but I'm a proud Clevelander, and I believe it's that way throughout. And we kind of share in the successes and we share in the issues. So one thing I think, if you look at the sports teams. It's the fans of the Cleveland Indians, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Browns doesn't end at the city of Cleveland border. And doing it right, it's one of those things that is absolutely a unifier, and it's something we could take greater advantage of. But I also think it broadens the question a little bit, but. It's the whole notion of regionalism is we talk about it all the time, and if we don't begin to do a better job of acting regional and not just talking regional, we're going to keep falling behind. And again, how exactly the teams fit in is a little bit of a tough question. Other than they are owned. Forget the actual owner. I think they are owned by this community, and this community is regional. And I think there is something very unifying. I would love to see every college student in Northeast Ohio make sure they're at an Indians or Cavs or Browns game. If we have these students, whether they're Kent State or Case or Cleveland State, we need to keep them here. Columbus is growing because they keep their students at Ohio State. They make such an effort to tie their students into Columbus. And I can tell you stories when we were looking with our kids. We went to some of talked to some of the people at Ohio State with one kid there, one not, and they were giving example after example of how their kids work in this city department to help solve a city problem. And so again, the more we can do, I think the teams are really important to that, of getting our kids who are in Northeast Ohio to feel a part of it. And I think that's one of the best ways, whether it's arts or sports, getting them to experience what Cleveland is through those mediums is critically important.
I think that sports teams in particular right now are very actively involved in doing economic development with the communities right now, and you're seeing that all over the country. And I think we're getting there as well. I think that all of us have the need to have ancillary revenue, if you will. So if you have a stadium or an arena or a ballpark, if there's additional land, I think that it would be helpful to have the sports teams and the community sort of work together to sort of develop these areas where you have an entertainment district, if you will. And you see a lot of that right now, especially in some of the new ballparks that are being built. But that doesn't negate the people that already have buildings here, because in a lot of ways it still is a viable attraction for people to live and work around the shadow of a entertainment district in some way. And I think there's a lot to do still in this town in order to do all that stuff. Workforce development is a little more of a challenge for us, but we have a whole farm system of people that we develop in our office, as the Cavs do as well, where you develop young people, part-time people that you sort of bring along and train them into being salespeople or customer service people, and allow them to sort of grow within your organization, become full-time benefited folks. And like a lot of the same thing with sports teams, there are tons of first-time job seekers that we bring into our offices or in our concessions or our ballpark that have their first job as a team member, if you will, whether it's an usher or a security person or a hot dog flipper. You know, but that's part of what we do, you know, in a lot of ways, and it's part of what we can do as teams.
It's interesting, in TV, when your time is up, they just take you off the air. At the City Club, Dan Moulthrop gets up, which means your time is up.
Thank you very much, Russ Mitchell. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a forum to close out Major League Baseball's All-Star Week, featuring David Gilbert of the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission and Dennis Lehman of your Cleveland Indians. We thank all of you for joining us today. That brings us to the end of our forum. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Lehman, Mr. Gilbert. Thank you, members and friends of the City Club. Our forum is adjourned. Have a wonderful weekend.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.